Dolly Parton has never been only a country singer. Her voice has lived in American kitchens, pickup trucks, church pews, weddings, funerals, and bedrooms where someone needed one song to make the night less lonely. For decades, the rhinestones and radiant smile seemed to promise that tomorrow might be kinder. Then, at 80, Dolly stepped back. A celebrated Las Vegas return disappeared from the calendar as her health demanded something fame had rarely allowed her to take: time. Behind that decision stood another absence the stage could not repair: the loss of Carl Dean, her husband and private companion for nearly 60 years. America had always looked to Dolly for comfort. Now the woman beneath the glitter needed room to carry grief of her own. How does someone who spent a lifetime lifting millions learn to let herself rest? Subscribe to the channel as we look beyond the rhinestones and remember the life, strength, and hidden cost behind the woman America thought would always keep singing. The strength beneath Dolly Parton's rhinestones began in a one-room cabin in East Tennessee. Born on January 19, 1946, the fourth of 12 children, Dolly Rebecca Parton entered a family rich in love and short on nearly everything else. The household held more hearts than space, and every ordinary day required each person to contribute. Poverty shaped the food on the table, the clothes on their backs, the work assigned to each child, the sleep available at the end of the day, and the choices the family faced whenever hardship entered the house. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, worked as a sharecropper and laborer, accepting whatever honest job might keep the family together. He had little formal education and could neither read nor write, yet Dolly saw an intelligence no school had measured. He understood land, animals, people, responsibility, and the quiet discipline of keeping a family alive. She also witnessed how easily the world could diminish a capable man simply because words on a page remained beyond his reach. His weathered hands became one of her earliest definitions of dignity. From her mother, A.V. Lee, came another inheritance: old Appalachian ballads carrying faith, humor, sorrow, death, and survival. A.V. Lee could turn family history into music and hardship into a story her children could bear. In a crowded home where privacy was rare, her voice gave pain a shape and dignity a shelter. Dolly learned that suffering could be spoken without surrendering to it, and that a song could preserve what poverty tried to erase. That lesson would one day be stitched into a coat. Unable to buy something new, A.V. Lee gathered pieces of colorful fabric and made her daughter a patchwork jacket. As she sewed, she told Dolly the biblical story of Joseph and his coat of many colors, transforming scraps into a garment the child believed was precious. Dolly wore it to school, carrying her mother's labor and love around her shoulders. Her classmates saw the patches and laughed. Their mockery struck deeper because they were ridiculing more than a coat. They were ridiculing the hands that had made it and the pride those hands had tried to give her. Years later, Dolly refused to leave the memory in the classroom where it had wounded her. Through Coat of Many Colors, she gave the experience another ending, preserving the laughter, the poverty, and the love her mother had sewn into every piece. The song never romanticized hunger or hardship. It revealed how wealth can exist in forms a cruel room refuses to recognize. The little girl mocked for wearing scraps grew into a songwriter who made millions understand that the coat had held a value money could never purchase. Her classmates had mistaken hardship for shame. Dolly turned their laughter into a song and taught the world to live. The mountains gave Dolly Parton her first stage well before the country knew her name. She sang on the family porch, in church, on local radio, and anywhere a child with a song could persuade someone to listen. At 5, before she could read or write, she composed Little Tiny Tassel Top, while her mother wrote down the words. Her microphone was an old tin can fixed to a tobacco stick between the porch boards. The equipment was homemade, but the desire behind it was already serious. Dolly learned early that a song could gather attention, carry a story, and make a small room feel larger than it was. Her uncle Bill Owens recognized that determination and became one of the first adults willing to invest time in it. He encouraged her to practice, helped her find local appearances, took her back and forth to Nashville, and walked beside her as they knocked on the doors of record labels and publishing companies. Dolly would later say that she owed him an enormous part of her success. Music was not merely a childhood fantasy. It became the path through which she imagined a larger life while preserving the language and memories of the place she came from. In 1964, after graduating from high school, 18-year-old Dolly moved to Nashville. She entered a city crowded with other hopeful singers and songwriters, carrying ambition but no guarantee that anyone in the business would make room for her. On the day she arrived, she met Carl Dean outside the wishy-washy laundromat. Dolly later remembered being surprised that he looked directly at her face and seemed genuinely interested in discovering who she was. Carl was not connected to the record industry. He became an asphalt paving businessman who preferred ordinary work and private life to premieres, award shows, or public attention. They married in Ringgold, Georgia, in 1966 in a small ceremony attended only by Dolly's mother, the minister, and his wife. Their marriage would endure through a contrast that outsiders found difficult to understand. Dolly moved toward larger stages while Carl protected a life away from them. She did not need him to become part of her public image, and he did not ask her to reduce the size of her ambition. A year after the wedding, another relationship began shaping her career. In 1967, at 21, Dolly joined the Porter Wagoner Show, stepping into millions of American homes and into the most important professional partnership of her early life. Joining Porter Wagoner changed Dolly's career almost immediately. Porter was already one of country television's most recognizable figures, known for his rhinestone suits, polished showmanship, humor, and successful syndicated program. Standing beside him gave Dolly an audience she had spent years trying to reach. Their contrast worked. His established presence met her crystalline voice, quick wit, and growing confidence, and viewers embraced them as a duet partnership. Dolly never forgot that Porter had opened an important door, but she had not come to Nashville to remain permanently inside another artist's career. As her solo ambitions expanded, the partnership became increasingly difficult. She wanted greater control over her music and the freedom to build a career under her own name. Porter had invested in their success and resisted an ending he did not want. Tension grew behind the scenes, and Dolly remained with the show longer than she had originally planned. The conflict involved emotion, business, contracts, publishing, loyalty, and the complicated debt an artist can feel toward the person who first gave her national visibility. During those years, Dolly wrote Jolene, drawing its central fear from a red-haired bank teller who had shown interest in Carl and borrowing the name from a young fan she met after a performance. The song's power came from restraint. Dolly did not threaten the other woman or pretend to feel secure. She allowed the narrator to plead, exposing the fear that love might be taken by someone who seemed impossible to compete with. Yet the deeper professional separation in Dolly's life still concerned Porter. Repeated conversations had failed to make him accept that she needed to leave, so Dolly communicated in the language she trusted most. In 1973, she wrote, "I will always love you," as a farewell filled with gratitude rather than accusation. When she played it for Porter, he began to cry. He called it the prettiest song he had ever heard and agreed that she could go if he were allowed to produce the record. The moment did not erase every disagreement, nor did it make their later business relationship simple. It revealed Dolly's unusual ability to hold two truths at once. Porter had helped change her life, and she could not allow gratitude to determine the rest of it. She did not need to deny what he had given her in order to claim what belonged to her. The song became both a thank you and a boundary, proof that departure did not require cruelty and that affection did not require permanent surrender. When Dolly finally stepped away from the show in 1974, she was no longer only the young woman Porter Wagoner had introduced to a national audience. She was a songwriter capable of turning an ending into one of the most enduring farewells in American music. And the larger world was about to discover how often it had mistaken her appearance for the limits of her intelligence. As Dolly Parton's fame expanded far beyond country music, Carl Dean remained where he had always felt most comfortable, beyond the machinery surrounding it. She became a vivid public figure under concert lights, in films, on television, and at ceremonies around the world. Carl continued his paving business, cared for their property, and kept his life separate from the spectacle of his wife's career. His absence fascinated reporters, and some coverage even joked that Dolly's rarely photographed husband might not exist. She answered with humor, revealing enough to satisfy the moment while keeping the marriage itself beyond public reach. Carl attended an industry event with her early in their marriage, and afterward told her that the crowds and performance of show business were not for him. He loved music, but he had little interest in the world built around selling it. Dolly understood. She could accept awards without requiring him beside her, and Carl could prefer home without asking her to shrink the ambition that carried her across the world. Their marriage found strength in difference. Dolly traveled, Carl valued familiar ground. She enjoyed crowds, he protected solitude. Between them were humor, independence, shared routines, and a private life that belonged to neither reporters nor fans. They never had children, a subject interviewers often approached as though every woman owed the public an explanation. Dolly answered in different ways over the years, sometimes through faith, sometimes through circumstance, and sometimes through the belief that her path had left room for many children to enter her concern. Motherhood was never the only measure she accepted for a meaningful life. Her affection moved through nieces, nephews, younger relatives, audiences, and eventually programs serving children she would never meet. She approached absence as she approached many obstacles, by recognizing what could not be changed and turning toward what remained possible. Life without children gave her freedom to travel, write, build businesses, support relatives, and care for a family circle far larger than one household. Carl offered something equally rare, a relationship in which she did not have to perform. By the end of the 1970s, that private foundation had helped carry Dolly beyond Nashville. Hollywood was preparing to discover whether the woman beneath the wigs and jokes could command a screen as confidently as she commanded a stage. By 1980, Dolly was 34 and already understood what it meant to be welcomed for her appeal while being underestimated for her appearance. Nashville had taught her to defend her songs, negotiate her independence, and recognize when a smile concealed condescension. Hollywood presented the same lesson in a different setting. 9 to 5, starring Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, became Dolly's first feature film. The casting naturally raised questions about whether a country singer known for towering wigs, rhinestones, and quick jokes could hold her own beside two established actresses. Dolly approached the opportunity with preparation rather than defensiveness. She played Dorothy Rhodes, a secretary judged by co-workers and pursued by a dishonest boss because of how she looked. Dolly understood the wound beneath that story. Her own public image had often encouraged people to confuse theatrical femininity with a lack of intelligence. Dorothy allowed her to expose that mistake without abandoning the humor and warmth audiences already associated with her. While working on the film, Dolly began developing its title song. She ran her acrylic fingernails against one another, creating a dry, clicking rhythm that resembled office machinery and the repetitive pressure of the working day. That improvised beat became part of 9 to 5, a song bright enough for radio, yet sharp enough to carry the exhaustion of employees whose labor enriched people above them. It spoke especially clearly to women who performed essential work while being overlooked, underpaid, harassed, or dismissed as replaceable. The film turned those frustrations into comedy without pretending they were imaginary. Dolly's performance did something equally important. She did not remove the makeup, flatten her hair, or exchange her familiar style for a more respectable disguise before asking audiences to take her seriously. She arrived as herself, and made the stereotype collapse around her. 9 to 5 became a major commercial success, while the title song reached listeners far beyond the film and established Dolly as a force in mainstream popular culture. The same appearance that some people had used as evidence against her became part of the intelligence of her performance. Dolly understood that underestimation could offer a strategic advantage. While others were laughing at the surface, she was studying the room, writing the music, protecting the rights, and preparing the next move. She often answered dumb blonde assumptions with the joke that she was neither dumb nor naturally blonde. But the deeper response was already visible in her work. She did not ask Hollywood to stop seeing the rhinestones. She required it to recognize the mind that had chosen where every one of them belonged. The triumph widened her world, but success had not made her body inexhaustible. As the public image grew stronger, the woman carrying it was moving toward a private physical crisis that no amount of wit or discipline could simply outwork. Dolly Parton's public image had always been deliberately larger than life. The high heels, rhinestones, narrow waists, towering hair, and a smile capable of making other people's burdens feel lighter for a few minutes. She understood the construction and often joked about it before anyone else could. Yet the body carrying that image remained human. It absorbed years of travel, performance schedules, business pressure, changing weight, interrupted sleep, and the expectation that Dolly would arrive cheerful regardless of what was happening beyond the stage. In her mid-30s, near the height of her crossover success, that body forced a reckoning. After years of gynecological problems, Dolly underwent a partial hysterectomy at 36. She later spoke openly about the serious depression surrounding that period, describing a darkness that lasted many months and left her struggling to recognize the energetic woman the public expected to see. The crisis involved more than one disappointment. Her health, professional strain, personal relationships, and the relentless pace of her life had converged until determination alone could no longer carry her through. Dolly had built a career by working harder whenever a door resisted her. Illness offered no door to push open. It required rest, treatment, faith, and an admission that even discipline has physical limits. The surgery also meant she would not give birth to children, but that fact should not be used to define the remainder of her life as an unhealed maternal wound. Dolly later described the subject through acceptance as well as loss. She acknowledged that a different life might have included children, while also recognizing that her independence allowed her to travel, write, build businesses, support relatives, and eventually serve families far beyond her own household. Her care for children did not emerge from one medical event or from a single empty place waiting to be filled. It grew from her large family, her faith, her love for young people, her father's illiteracy, and her belief that success created obligations. The woman who recovered from that private collapse did not return because every difficulty had vanished. She returned with a clearer understanding that survival sometimes required changing the structure around a life, not merely forcing the body to endure more of it. Within a few years, Dolly would direct her energy toward an idea rooted not in Hollywood, but in the East Tennessee community that had first taught her what hardship, pride, work, and belonging meant. In 1986, at 40, Dolly joined the Herschen family in transforming Silver Dollar City, Tennessee, an established amusement park near her hometown, into Dollywood. She had spoken for years about creating something in the Smoky Mountains that could celebrate the region's culture while providing dependable work for local families. The Herschens brought decades of experience operating theme parks. Dolly brought her name, investment, artistic vision, instinct for an audience, and an emotional connection to Sevier County that no corporate strategy could reproduce. Together, they expanded the park around mountain music, storytelling, food, crafts, family entertainment, and the history of East Tennessee. Blacksmiths, woodcarvers, musicians, cooks, performers, and other craftspeople gave visitors access to traditions that remained alive in the communities surrounding the park. Dolly understood both the pride and the hardship of Appalachian life because she had grown up inside them. She wanted local people to have more reasons to remain near their families without surrendering the possibility of steady work. Dollywood created jobs, attracted tourism, strengthened surrounding businesses, and placed familiar voices, food, music, and craftsmanship before a national audience. The achievement carried a personal symmetry. The child who had once worn a coat made from fabric scraps became a businesswoman capable of directing millions of visitors toward the community that had formed her. Hollywood success never persuaded Dolly to hide the hills behind her image. She placed them at the center of one of the country's most recognizable entertainment destinations. The region's dignity had always lived in its labor, faith, families, music, and traditions. Dollywood gave those qualities greater visibility and helped turn cultural pride into economic opportunity. Dolly had traveled far beyond the poverty of her childhood, yet success only deepened her connection to the people who remained. She used the reach of her name to make their road wider. To understand the full measure of Dolly Parton's resolve as a businesswoman, one need only follow the life of a single song. "I Will Always Love You" began as her farewell to Porter Wagoner. But the emotions inside it were too universal to remain within one professional relationship or one corner of country music. After Dolly's recording became a hit, Elvis Presley expressed interest in recording it. For a young songwriter who had admired Elvis, the possibility was thrilling. Then, shortly before the planned session, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, informed her that Elvis generally did not record a song unless his organization received half of its publishing. The request placed Dolly before a painful choice. An Elvis recording could have brought prestige, attention, and substantial income. But publishing was the foundation of the future she was building. Dolly later remembered crying over the decision, especially while people around her questioned how anyone could turn down the king of rock and roll. She refused the terms. The decision was not a rejection of Elvis, whom she continued to admire. It was a refusal to surrender ownership of a song she had written and intended to preserve for herself and her family. Nearly 2 decades later, Whitney Houston recorded "I Will Always Love You" for The Bodyguard. Her performance carried the song into a different musical world, turning Dolly's quiet country farewell into a global vocal landmark. Because Dolly had protected her publishing, the enormous success of Whitney's version also rewarded the woman who had written the words. Dolly celebrated Whitney rather than treating her as a rival, understanding that another singer's interpretation could enlarge a song without diminishing its author. The story revealed something essential about her. Warmth and business judgment were not opposites. She could admire Elvis and still say no to his representatives. She could rejoice in Whitney's triumph while retaining the rights beneath it. Dolly had spent much of her career allowing people to mistake kindness for softness. Her publishing decisions showed that generosity could stand beside discipline, and that the woman smiling beneath the rhinestones always knew who held the pen. In 1995, Dolly carried her understanding of ownership into a place no royalty statement could measure. She launched the Imagination Library in Sevier County, Tennessee, offering enrolled children a carefully selected book mailed to their homes every month from birth until age 5, regardless of family income. The idea grew from her relationship with her father, Robert Lee Parton. He was intelligent, resourceful, and hardworking, yet he had never learned to read or write. Dolly saw how illiteracy could diminish a person's confidence in certain rooms without diminishing the wisdom he carried into them. The program became a way to honor him while he was alive, and to place opportunity where shame or poverty might otherwise arrive first. Robert Lee watched the early effort grow and took special pride when children began calling his daughter the Book Lady. The method was simple and deeply personal. No child had to win a contest, prove hardship, or wait for a holiday. A book arrived in the mailbox bearing that child's name, quietly declaring that reading belonged in the home and that imagination was available to every family. Local partners carried the idea beyond Sevier County, then across the United States and into Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and the Republic of Ireland. By 2026, the Imagination Library had gifted more than 300 million books. Its deepest roots reached into Dolly's childhood poverty, her father's experience, her faith in early learning, and her belief that success created a responsibility to widen the road for others. She could not return the education her father had missed, but she could help another child meet words before disadvantage turned learning into a source of fear. The daughter of a man who could not read became the founder of a program that sent hundreds of millions of words into family homes. Robert Lee's struggle became more than a private family wound. Through Dolly, it opened a door for the next generation. By the early 2020s, the books were still arriving in children's mailboxes, while Dolly Parton's voice continued finding new rooms of its own. Listeners who had first known her beside Porter Wagoner still heard the mountain girl they had welcomed into their homes decades earlier. Their children remembered 9 to 5, their grandchildren discovered Jolene through streaming and social media, and families who had never purchased one of her records knew her as the woman sending books to their youngest members. Few American artists belonged so naturally to several generations at once. Dolly protected that connection by refusing to turn every interview into a political contest. Her convictions appeared most clearly through what she built and supported: literacy, disaster recovery, medical research, families in East Tennessee, and communities that had carried her music across the years. In 2020, she donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center for COVID-19 research. The funding supported several scientific efforts, including work connected with the study and testing of the Moderna vaccine. Dolly placed the attention where she believed it belonged, on the researchers trying to save lives, and treated her contribution as one more way success could be returned to the public. 2 years later, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominated her for induction. Dolly initially asked to withdraw, believing she had not yet earned the right to call herself a rock artist, and unwilling to occupy a place she felt might belong to someone more firmly rooted in the genre. The hall kept her on the ballot, pointing to the deep relationship between rock, country, rhythm, and blues, and the musical traditions Dolly had carried throughout her career. She accepted the honor with gratitude, then responded in the language that had always mattered most to her: work. Released in 2023, Rockstar stretched across 30 tracks and brought her into the studio with Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Sting, Stevie Nicks, Ann Wilson, Elton John, and other defining voices of the era. At 77, Dolly entered unfamiliar musical territory with the curiosity of an artist who still believed there was more to learn. She continued writing, recording, building, and giving, while the listeners who had grown up beside her began confronting the passing years in their own lives. That shared aging gave her later appearances a different tenderness. The voice they had once assumed would always be there now belonged to an 80-year journey, still unmistakable, still generous, and increasingly precious, because time was moving for Dolly just as surely as it was moving for everyone listening. By 2026, Dolly Parton had reached 80, and the distance between the public image and the body carrying it had become harder to ignore. For decades, she had appeared beneath towering hair, rhinestones, high heels, and a smile so familiar that generations of listeners treated it as part of the American landscape. Her 80th year did not diminish that image. It revealed the human limits beneath it. After postponing her Las Vegas engagement, Dolly ultimately canceled the performances and explained that her immune and digestive systems had fallen out of balance. Treatment was helping, and she said she was improving each day, but medication sometimes left her unsteady. Carrying instruments, moving in high heels, wearing heavy costumes, and sustaining a full live show demanded more than her body could safely give. Dolly kept the reassurance in her own unmistakable voice. "I've still got some healing to do, but I'm on my way." The announcement disappointed fans who had grown older beside her songs, yet the deeper story was not simply about a canceled stage. During Carl Dean's final illness, Dolly later acknowledged that much of her attention had gone toward him, while her own health received less care than it needed. Carl was the man she had met outside a Nashville laundromat on the first day of her new life. The private companion who remained beside her while the rest of the country learned her name. When he died in 2025 at 82, their marriage had lasted nearly 59 years. Dolly had spent most of those decades protecting the relationship from public ownership, so the full shape of the loss belonged to a life audiences had rarely been allowed to see. She described the aftermath without performance. You have to learn new patterns, new ways, new thoughts, and all that. The grief lived there, in habits built across 6 decades that suddenly had to be relearned, in familiar conversation no longer available, and in the absence of the one person who had known her fame without needing anything from it. Work helped her continue, but it could not restore the private world they had shared. Dolly found comfort in faith and in the belief that Carl was no longer suffering. She also carried him forward deliberately, saying that she tried to bring him into the things she continued to do. In the tribute she released after his death, she gave their story one final public sentence: "He will always be the star of my life story." That line changed the meaning of the woman America saw stepping back at 80. She was not merely an entertainer recovering from illness. She was a widow learning how to inhabit a future whose daily shape had once included another person. Even then, Dolly's creative life continued. She remained involved in Dolly, a true original musical, combining familiar songs, new music, and the memories of a life she had spent decades turning into stories. Broadway performances were scheduled around her 81st birthday, making the production another act of authorship rather than an attempt to outrun time. Dolly had spent her life proving that she could work harder, travel farther, and return whenever the world expected her to appear. At 80, courage required a different discipline, listening when her body asked for time, accepting that grief had changed the rhythm of her days, and allowing recovery to matter more than another standing ovation. The woman who had taught America to expect that she would always show up was now offering another lesson. Stepping back did not mean disappearing. It meant protecting enough of herself to remain present for the life, the memories, and the work still waiting ahead. Dolly Parton's story cannot be contained by the familiar sentence about a poor mountain girl who became a star. Its meaning lies in what she did whenever the world tried to assign her value. Children saw poverty in a coat stitched by her mother. Dolly preserved the love inside it through a song. Nashville expected gratitude to keep her in place. She protected her publishing and chose when to leave. Hollywood saw wigs, curves, and country humor. She wrote 9 to 5, carried her first film, and proved that theatrical femininity could coexist with intelligence and control. Elvis Presley's representatives offered prestige in exchange for part of a song. Dolly kept the rights, and Whitney Houston later carried those words around the world. Her father's inability to read helped inspire a program that placed hundreds of millions of books into children's homes. Her East Tennessee childhood became neither a shameful past nor a sentimental decoration. Through Dollywood and other work, she directed jobs, attention, and opportunity toward the community that had formed her. None of this means every loss became beautiful. Carl remained gone. Her body required treatment. Some stages had to wait. Dolly's achievement was never a life untouched by suffering, but a refusal to let suffering decide what happened next. Her legacy lives when a working woman hears 9 to 5 and feels understood, when a songwriter learns that ownership matters, when "I Will Always Love You" carries what ordinary speech cannot, and when a child opens a book bearing his or her own name. Thank you, Dolly, for proving that kindness can carry judgment, discipline, humor, and strength. If her music, generosity, or life has entered your family story, leave a tribute in the comments. Tell us the song you remember, the person who first played it for you, or the moment her voice helped you continue. Subscribe as this new channel preserves the stories behind the artists who became part of our lives. Dolly's greatest stage was never confined to Nashville, Hollywood, or Las Vegas. It was wherever someone heard her voice and discovered that sorrow could be carried without being allowed to speak the final word.